Hello! We are going to make a simple 3D model of one of the two hardcover books that you obtained in anticipation of winter quarter. If you haven't obtained these books, consider this your reminder. I'm using Rhino 4 for Windows for this demonstration, as Rhino is designed to be Windows native. If you're using the free beta version of Rhino for Mac, your screen may look a little bit different than what's on my screen, but all of the basic tools should be present. Don't panic. Feel free to pause the video frequently to locate your tools if you need to. This is one of the primary benefits of using video tutorials to learn software. When you first open Rhino, a startup screen will appear asking what units and what size your model will be. If you single-click on any of the options, you will see a more detailed description explaining what that option is. By reading through these descriptions, go ahead and select the option that you think would be most appropriate for modeling a book. Even though I believe the metric system is a superior measurement system, I find myself entrenched in the imperial system and it's hard for me to change. Therefore, I'm going to select small objects and inches. If I click here, small objects and inches, I see that this is for building objects the size of a truck or smaller, and for objects that must be built to manufacturing tolerances. So it's inches, and we have a very low tolerance set for small objects. And go ahead and click Open. The first thing you may notice about Rhino is that the screen is split into 4 windows. Think of this arrangement as analogous to the hand drafting exercises we completed in fall quarter, where we had the top view, the front view, the side view, in this case labeled right, and they were intentionally oriented next to each other, right? The top, the front, and the side view always had an intentional adjacency. And then we also had a 3D view. In the case of our hand drafting exercises, our 3D view was an axonometric drawing, or an oblique. In contrast, Rhino defaults to a perspective drawing type for the 3D view. Together, these 4 views of any object give a fairly comprehensive description of the shape of that object. When I'm modeling, I find it really helpful to toggle between the 4 viewport screen and a single view that's larger. To toggle, simply double-click on the name of the view and double-click to go back. If you're using the Mac version, there should be a little plus next to the name that you can click on, and that'll toggle you back and forth. Go ahead and toggle back and forth a few times just to get the hang of that. At the top of the screen is one of the most important features of Rhino. The command prompt is Rhino's way of communicating with you. Rhino will ask you questions here, it will give you instructions, and you will have the ability to give Rhino detailed instructions back through the command prompt. If you're using the Mac version of Rhino, your command prompt will be a floating window instead of a docked region. Don't let this cause you any frustration. Both configurations work the same way. Go ahead and click within your Rhino window anywhere or up at the command line so that you see a blinking cursor next to the word command. Type the letter L and then pause. Rhino will give you a list of all of the commands that start with the letter L. Sometimes I can't exactly remember the name of a command, and I use this feature to jog my memory. And sometimes I'm a little too lazy to type the entire name of the command, and again, this allows me to just sort of auto-fill what the name of the command is. So once you type the letter, there's a few ways that you can select. I can then use my mouse and go ahead and click on the option that I'd like. I hit the escape key to cancel out of a command. I can use my arrow keys to move up and down through that list, and then hit enter to select that option. A third way that I can enter a command is if I start typing and I see the name of the command that I'd like, I can go ahead and just continue typing until Rhino fills it in for me, and then I hit enter to input that command. Looking around the perimeter of the screen, you'll see that you have toolbars down the left similar to Photoshop or Illustrator, and these tools are for creating the model. You can right-click on a blank portion of the toolbar area to display additional tools. As you become more advanced and have a good idea of what tools you like to use, you may choose to add more toolbars over to the left side of your screen. Below the command prompt are some basic tools that are more about how to manage and view your file than about creating the file itself. You'll see a group of tools for navigating your model space, including Pan, Rotate, Zoom in and out, Zoom Window, Zoom Extents, Zoom Selected, go back to your previous view, your viewports, and then you can select views. Go ahead and play with these navigation tools within your viewport. Notice that if you use the Rotate tool in a perspective view, makes sense, we rotate the perspective view. If I use the Rotate tool in an orthographic view, I've now just distorted this field, so it's no longer orthographic. I'd advise that you try not to do this. It's best to keep your orthographic views orthographic and use your perspective viewport to look at things in 3D. In order to reset this, you can go to the button with the little red car, which is your Set View menu, and go ahead and click the top view of the car, and that'll reset it back to the orthographic view. Notice I click and hold on any of my menus, on any of my toolbars, to bring up an expanded menu, and sometimes there are expanded menus nested within. If you see this little white arrow, that's one more time you can click and hold, and that brings even another expanded window. Go ahead and click the little X button to close any of those expanded toolbars. So let's just make a simple box. Let's go over to our toolbar and select the box command. And in the perspective window, notice as I move my cursor around, I can see it in all 4 viewports simultaneously. I'd like to go to the perspective window, go ahead, click one corner, click another corner, and then the third option is giving me the height. So there, I've just created a box. Well done. Your mouse, in addition to the tools across the top, your mouse is a very handy navigation tool. So you might notice here, for example, in the top view, my box is not in the view. If you just click and hold your right mouse button in any of your orthographic views, it is the Pan command. So you can click and hold your right mouse button in order to center the object in any of those viewports. If I use my middle mouse button, rolling it up or down, it zooms within any of those views. The perspective view is a little bit different though. In the perspective view, if I click and hold my right mouse button and move my mouse, I'm actually rotating my view, and I have to hold the Shift key and click and hold the right mouse button in order to pan. I know it's a little bit weird that it's inconsistent between the viewports. Let's look at some different ways to display geometry. Right now we're looking at this in essentially a wireframe mode, which is the default for Rhino, right? We're just seeing a wire skeleton of our object. And what we're seeing here on the center of each face, those are called isocurves. Isocurves will eventually be your friend, but for now let me show you how to turn them off. Click on the tool that looks like a rainbow wheel, which is your Properties tool. A new dialog box will appear. I like to keep the Properties window open all the time, so if you need to make a little space for it over here on the right side of your screen, go ahead and close any other windows that might be open. We want to select the object so that we can turn the isocurves off for that object. To select the object, you just click on it. And over here in the Properties box, you'll now see under Isocurve Density, a little box where you can uncheck Visible. That's a little cleaner. Now let's look at some of our other display mode options. The Shade mode, which is represented here, shades each surface with varying values, assuming that there's a light source coming from the left. Rotate the view by holding the right mouse button down, and you'll see the values of each surface change in relation to this default light source. I'm going to go ahead and enlarge my perspective window so we can see this a little bit better. The shaded viewport button, without an over, shows us both the wireframe and the shaded view simultaneously. The final button in this three-part display mode sequence is render. We could spend a whole quarter teaching and learning rendering, and some of you may find that you spend your career in the field of rendering. For now, just go ahead and click on the button, and either Rhino Render or Brazil will open in a separate window, and it'll generate the scene. You will get a very generic image, and this image is no longer editable geometry. A rendered image is a picture. A rendered image is a raster file that can be saved as a JPEG, a PNG, or a TIFF, or any other type of raster file format that you may be interested in. This rendered file can be opened in Photoshop or placed in InDesign. Rendering is a method of getting 3D work out of a 3D modeling software so that it can be used to create images, to create presentations, and portfolios. If I wanted to now, I could save this image, save as a JPEG, and there you go, you have your rendering. In the future, we'll spend more time talking about rendering so that you'll see, hopefully, you can make much more beautiful and interesting renderings than shown on the screen. At this time, I'd like you to take a few minutes to look through the pull-down menus. File, Edit, and Help should all be familiar from almost all software programs. And in Rhino, they're not much different from what you're familiar with. Curve, Surface, Solid, and Mesh, however, these are basically describing to you the types of geometry that Rhino is capable of creating. Pull down each of these and you'll see some familiar items, such as curves that are lines or circles, surfaces that are planes, solids that are boxes or pyramids, and, well, meshes might not be so familiar to us yet. But we'll also see kind of some unfamiliar things, like sweeps and lofts, NURBS. While it's important for you eventually to know that Rhino is a NURBS modeler, and that NURBS stands for Non-Uniform Rational B-Spline Surfaces, at this time I'd rather we just move on and we'll fill in some of the detail and the technical information as you get more familiar with the program. There are many incredible sources of tutorials on Rhino. If you look under the Help menu, there are some tutorials that come from McNeil, who created Rhino. Getting started, here's your tutorial models, so I'd recommend that you take a look at that. There are some open source links. One of the groups are former Cal Poly students. But Cal Poly also pays for all of us to have a subscription to lynda.com. The lynda.com videos are extremely professional and detailed, and they are really excellent tutorials. I'd highly recommend that you watch the section called Basic 3D Terminology so that you have an understanding of the types of geometry that you'll be creating. So each of these menus will be dissected, and you'll be given sort of the definition of what each of those geometries actually means. Okay, so take a few minutes to look through your pull-down menus, and when you're finished with that, let's move on to layers. In order to look at layers, we want to click on this rather patriotic piece of cake here to open your Layers dialog box. As with all of the Adobe software that you learned last quarter, layers are an essential way to keep your file usable, clean, and organized. To change the name of any layer, you do a slow double click so that it highlights, and then you can type the name and hit enter. To change the color, simply double click, it'll pull up a window, you can change the color, And similar to Adobe, you can just click the light bulb for visibility and the lock icon to lock the layer. To change the order of the layers, use the up and down arrows. To change an object's layer, select the object, right-click on the layer, and select Change Object Layer. Notice that the color of the object will change to match the color of the layer. It may seem strange at first, but you should use layer colors that are easy to see and are clearly distinct from each other, even if it means that the color may not be true to reality. Go ahead and just for fun, click the render button again, and you'll see that the rendering looks the same as before. This is because the model color, the layer color, and the object's material are not the same thing. For this reason, you're able to make your model full of color for ease of working, and not worry that your design is going to end up looking like a McDonald's playland once you render an output for your final presentation. This is a good place for us to talk about saving, and then we'll have another tutorial where we model your book. When you're finished with your model, let's say this is perfect, go ahead and save your file by going to the File and Save menu. One of the best things about Rhino is that it's compatible with many file types. Sometimes Rhino is used just to convert data between different 3D modeling programs such as Maya and 3D Studio Max because it's so good at saving different file types and importing different file types. If you click here in the Save As Type dialog box, you can see all the different types of files that Rhino can save in. It's really a pretty impressive list. For now, go ahead and just save as a Rhino 3DM. Rhino files are .3dm. Give your file a name, save it in a logical location, and go ahead and hit save. If you'd like to print, if you'd like to output to paper, it's pretty simple. Just go File, Print. By default, Rhino is going to just print the window that's open. So here, since the perspective window is open, that's the view that I get. One thing here, vector output will give you the wireframe. Raster output will give you the shaded view. You have a number of other options here that I'd recommend that you play with. Go ahead and hit print, and that would be a great way that you could bring proof of your 3D model to class to show your instructor.